My name is Natalie Pearson, and at 32, I never imagined I'd be a divorced nanny watching my sister Vanessa humiliate me at her engagement party. The room fell silent when she sneered. At least I'm not a divorced nanny who couldn't keep her marriage together. As laughter rippled through the crowd, something unexpected happened. Ethan, her fiancé, stood up, took my hand, and announced, "She's the reason I'm alive today." Then, he dropped the ring on the table and walked out, leaving everyone shocked. Nobody knew our secret connection until that night. If you're enjoying this story already, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear how my sister's perfect night turned into a revelation that changed everything for both of us. Growing up in our affluent Connecticut suburb, Vanessa was always 3 steps ahead of me. Literally 3 years older, but figuratively miles beyond in our parents' eyes. Our childhood home on Maple Avenue was beautiful from the outside, pristine white colonial with perfectly manicured lawns, but inside, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken competition. Vanessa excelled at everything she touched. Piano recitals where she'd perform flawlessly while I struggled through basic scales. Math competitions where her name would be announced for first place while I sat in the audience clapping with everyone else. Even our bedrooms told the story, hers decorated with trophies and certificates, mine with participation ribbons at best. "Natalie, why can't you focus like your sister?" became my father Richard's constant refrain. He was a successful corporate attorney who valued achievement above all else. "Vanessa's already reading at a 5th grade level," he'd announced to dinner guests when we were in elementary school, while I shrank in my seat. My mother Elizabeth wasn't much better. A former beauty queen turned interior designer, she'd take us shopping and spend hours selecting the perfect outfits for Vanessa. "This brings out your eyes beautifully," she'd gush. For me, it was quick decisions and practical choices. "This is on sale, and you need new clothes for school." I remember my 10th birthday when Vanessa, then 13, convinced everyone at my party to play a game she invented, one where coincidentally all the rules favored older kids. When I started crying after losing repeatedly, my mother pulled me aside. "Don't be such a sore loser, Natalie. Vanessa's just naturally competitive." The pattern continued through high school. Vanessa was student body president, valedictorian, and homecoming queen. I joined the yearbook committee and found I had a talent for photography, but when I showed my parents my first published photo, my father glanced at it briefly. "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Vanessa got accepted to Yale?" Early decision. Yale was just the beginning. While Vanessa excelled at her Ivy League education, I attended community college, struggling to find my path. I eventually earned a teaching degree, though I never managed to land a permanent position at a school. My parents called it settling when I took a job at a daycare center. Vanessa called it giving up. When I met Daniel at 22, it felt like my life was finally beginning. He worked in marketing, had a charming smile, and most importantly, he saw me not as Vanessa's lesser sister, but as Natalie, funny, caring, and worthy of attention. Our whirlwind romance led to a modest wedding at the local botanical gardens. Vanessa showed up in a dress that nearly outshone my wedding gown and brought a date who spent the reception networking with my father's colleagues. "It's cute," Vanessa said about our small rental house when she visited for the first time. "Very starter home." My parents echoed similar sentiments, bringing housewarming gifts that were clearly meant for a much larger space. "You can save this for when you upgrade," my mother said, presenting a chandelier that would never fit in our dining area. Meanwhile, Vanessa blazed through law school and landed at a prestigious firm in Boston. Family gatherings became showcases for her achievements. Major cases won, salary increases, vacation homes toured. Daniel would squeeze my hand under the table when the conversation inevitably turned to, "When will Natalie go back to school for a real degree?" 7 years into my marriage, Vanessa met Ethan Cooper at a charity gala. He was a medical researcher specializing in immunology, with several patents and publications to his name. My parents were ecstatic. "Finally, someone at Vanessa's level," my mother gushed during a phone call. "They make such a power couple." The first time I met Ethan was at my parents' anniversary dinner. There was something strangely familiar about him, though I couldn't place it. He was tall with kind eyes and a reserved manner that seemed at odds with Vanessa's outgoing personality. When we were introduced, there was a flicker of recognition in his expression, quickly masked as he shook my hand. "Nice to meet you, Natalie. I've heard a lot about you." Something in his tone suggested what he'd heard wasn't particularly flattering, but his smile seemed genuine. Throughout dinner, I caught him watching me with curiosity when Vanessa was engaged in conversation with others. At the time, I thought nothing of it, just another successful person probably wondering how Vanessa and I could be related. Little did I know that our paths had crossed before, in a way that would eventually upend everything my family thought they knew about both of us. After 7 years of marriage, my world imploded on a random Tuesday evening. I'd come home early from work, planning to surprise Daniel with his favorite dinner. Instead, I found receipts for jewelry I'd never received, text messages from someone named Stephanie, and eventually, evidence of a year-long affair. The confrontation that followed was ugly: denial, gaslighting, and finally, a confession that felt more like an accusation. "You're always so focused on what your family thinks," Daniel said, as if that justified his betrayal. I felt invisible. The divorce process was a nightmare of paperwork, mediation sessions, and dividing possessions that once represented our shared dreams. The hardest part wasn't losing the house we could no longer afford or watching Daniel update his relationship status weeks after moving out. It was facing my family with the news of my failure. "Marriage takes work, Natalie," my mother said, her tone suggesting I hadn't tried hard enough. "Your father and I have been married for 35 years. The unspoken comparison to Vanessa hung in the air between us. Vanessa herself was less subtle. "Well, I saw this coming," she announced over brunch, 3 days after I'd signed the final papers. "He always seemed like he was settling, if I'm being honest." "No offense." I downsized from our small house to an even smaller apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. Most of our mutual friends sided with Daniel, especially after Stephanie announced her pregnancy 6 months after our divorce was finalized. Apparently, their relationship had been common knowledge in our social circle. I was the last to know. The financial strain was immediate and severe. My teaching assistant position barely covered rent and utilities. When the preschool announced budget cuts, I was among the first let go due to my lack of seniority. Rock bottom came when I took a waitressing job at a diner near my apartment, serving breakfast to commuters from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. It was there I met Mrs. Foster, an elegant older woman who came in every Wednesday morning for poached eggs and black coffee. She noticed my education degree on the Meet Your Server profile the manager insisted we display. "My daughter needs a nanny for her 2 children," she told me one morning. "Someone with actual education experience, not just a babysitter. Would you be interested?" That conversation led me to the Hamilton family, Jessica, Michael, and their children Emma and Lucas, ages 4 and 6. The position paid better than waitressing and aligned with my training. More importantly, it gave me purpose during the darkest period of my life. The children's unconditional affection healed parts of me I thought were permanently broken. Over time, I built a reputation as a reliable, educated childcare provider. I took courses in early childhood development and specialized in working with families with busy professional parents. The work was demanding but rewarding, far from the just babysitting that Vanessa described it as whenever family asked about my career. "Natalie's playing house with other people's children," she told our cousin Laura at Thanksgiving, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen. "I guess since her own family fell apart, it's the next best thing." That first holiday season after my divorce was excruciating. I arrived at my parents' house alone while Vanessa brought Ethan, now officially her boyfriend. They looked perfect together, both successful, attractive, and seemingly in love. My mother fawned over Ethan, repeatedly mentioning how wonderful it was to have a doctor in the family, though he gently corrected her each time, explaining he had a PhD in immunology, but wasn't a medical doctor. Throughout the evening, I caught glimpses of Ethan watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not pity exactly, but something more complex. When Vanessa proudly detailed their recent vacation to the Maldives, He seemed almost embarrassed by her boasting. Once, when I was alone in the kitchen putting away leftovers, he came in to get water and quietly asked if I was doing okay. The genuine concern in his voice caught me off guard, and I nearly broke down. It had been months since anyone in my family had actually asked about my well-being. "I'm getting there," I answered honestly. "One day at a time." He nodded as if he truly understood, and for a moment, I felt seen in a way I hadn't since before my marriage ended. Before he could say anything else, Vanessa called from the living room, and the moment passed. I didn't think much of it at the time, just a kind gesture from someone who seemed unusually perceptive. I had no idea there was much more to the story. 2 years before Vanessa brought Ethan home as her boyfriend, I was working for the Hamilton family in their upscale Boston suburb. It was a crisp autumn day when I took Emma and Lucas to Franklin Park, their favorite spot for weekend adventures. The children were racing around the playground while I kept watch from a nearby bench, occasionally photographing their antics for their parents. That's when I noticed a man on a bench about 20 feet away. He was reading something on his tablet, occasionally stopping to eat from a small container of mixed nuts. What caught my attention was how he suddenly sat up straight, his hand going to his throat. Within seconds, his breathing became labored, and he dropped his tablet on the ground. I recognized the signs immediately. My youngest cousin has severe allergies, and I'd been trained to spot anaphylaxis. Telling the children to stay put, I rushed over to find the man's face swelling rapidly, his breathing becoming a strained wheeze. "Do you have an EpiPen?" I asked urgently. He managed to gesture to his backpack. I found the auto-injector, removed the safety cap, and administered it to his outer thigh. As I called 911, I tried to keep him calm, explaining that help was coming while monitoring his breathing. The children, concerned but obedient, stayed at the playground, though they watched with wide eyes. The ambulance arrived within minutes. As paramedics loaded him onto a stretcher, he grasped my hand weakly. "Thank you," he managed to say. "I think you saved my life." Later that evening, after ensuring the children were safely home with their parents, I visited the hospital. It felt important somehow to check on the stranger whose life had intersected so dramatically with mine. I found him in the ER, looking much better though still hooked up to monitoring equipment. "You actually came," he said, surprise evident in his voice.
I'm Ethan Cooper.
"Natalie Pearson," I replied. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thanks to you. Doctor says if you hadn't administered the EpiPens so quickly." He left the sentence unfinished, but we both understood the implication. That chance encounter sparked an unexpected friendship. Ethan insisted on buying me coffee the following week as a thank you. I learned he was a researcher specializing in immunology, ironically studying allergic responses similar to the one that had nearly killed him. He'd recently moved to Boston for a new position at a medical research facility. Our coffee meetings became a semi-regular occurrence, nothing romantic, just two people enjoying conversation. Ethan was easy to talk to, thoughtful in a way that made me feel my opinions mattered. He confided that he'd been struggling with depression before his allergic reaction, and how facing death had shifted his perspective. "It sounds cliché," he admitted during one of our meetings, but nearly dying made me realize I wasn't really living. I was just going through the motions, focused on work but disconnected from everything else. He looked at me intently. "Your intervention wasn't just medical, Natalie. It was a wake-up call to start engaging with life again." We lost touch after I changed jobs and moved to a different neighborhood following my divorce. Boston is a small big city, not so massive that running into someone is impossible, but large enough that without effort, connections fade. I occasionally wondered how Ethan was doing, but assumed our brief friendship had run its course. Then came the shock of seeing him at my parents' dining table, his arm around my sister's waist. The moment our eyes met, there was mutual recognition, followed by something like panic. Vanessa was midway through introducing us when Ethan extended his hand formally. "Nice to meet you, Natalie," he said, his eyes communicating what his words didn't. "Please don't mention that we know each other." I played along, shaking his hand and pretending we were strangers. Later, when Vanessa was helping my mother in the kitchen, Ethan found me on the porch and quickly explained. I didn't tell Vanessa about knowing you, he said in a low voice. When I realized you were her sister, it seemed complicated. I wasn't hiding anything important, just a friendship, but Vanessa would make it into something it wasn't. I finished for him. I understood all too well how my sister could twist innocent situations. It's okay. It doesn't matter now anyway. He seemed relieved, though something in his expression suggested discomfort beyond just this coincidence. Thank you, again, for everything. After that, family gatherings took on an additional layer of awkwardness. I observed Ethan and Vanessa together with the unique perspective of someone who knew them both separately. What I saw concerned me. The Ethan I had known was thoughtful, humble, and genuine. With Vanessa, he seemed diminished somehow, less likely to express his own opinions, more carefully measured in his responses. During one dinner, I noticed how Vanessa subtly cut him off whenever he started sharing his research with my father. Nobody wants to hear about lab work during dinner, honey, she'd say with a laugh, though my father had actually been asking questions with genuine interest. There were other red flags. How she checked his phone when he left the room, the way she corrected his table manners though his etiquette was impeccable, her dismissive tone when he suggested weekend plans that didn't align with her preferences. I recognized the pattern from my friends in controlling relationships, but it wasn't my place to say anything. Besides, who would believe me? The divorced nanny concerned about her perfect sister's relationship would sound like nothing but jealousy. At my cousin's wedding, 6 months into their relationship, Ethan and I ended up alone at the bar while Vanessa worked the room. He seemed more relaxed away from her watchful eye. How are you really doing, Natalie? He asked, his concern appearing genuine.
I'm rebuilding, he answered honestly.
The kids I work with now are amazing. They make everyday problems seem small. He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him that evening. You were always good at perspective. I remember how you handled the park incident, calm in a crisis, focused on what mattered. Before I could respond, Vanessa appeared, slipping her arm through Ethan's possessively. What are you two talking about so seriously? She asked, her tone light but her eyes suspicious. Just making small talk, Ethan replied. Natalie was telling me about her work. Babysitting, Vanessa corrected with a dismissive wave. Come on, the Andersons just arrived. Dad wants us to network with them. As she pulled him away, Ethan glanced back at me apologetically. That moment crystallized my concerns, but I kept them to myself. Our secret connection remained just that, secret. I didn't want to complicate his life or give Vanessa any ammunition against me. Besides, despite my misgivings, it wasn't my relationship to question. Little did I know that my silence would eventually lead to the dramatic confrontation that would expose everything. Vanessa and Ethan's engagement announcement came exactly 1 year after they started dating. The ring was spectacular, a 3-carat diamond that Vanessa made sure everyone noticed. Her Instagram account transformed into a wedding planning showcase, with daily updates about venues, dresses, and increasingly elaborate engagement photo shoots. Mom wants you to help with some of the preparations, Vanessa told me during a rare phone call. Nothing important, just stuffing envelopes and picking up some supplies. I've got professionals handling the real planning. Despite the dismissive way she framed it, I agreed to help. Family obligation runs deep, and I still harbored hope that contributing positively might improve our relationship. That optimism faded quickly during our shopping trip for party decorations. You're planning to get your hair done before the party, right? Vanessa asked as we browsed through expensive stationery. And maybe buy something presentable? It's going to be photographed for Boston Society magazine. I have a dress, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. She sighed dramatically. Just make sure it's appropriate. Not everyone understands the difference between cocktail attire and whatever it is you usually wear. Every interaction leading up to the engagement party followed the same pattern. Vanessa dictating, criticizing, and reminding me of my place in the family hierarchy. My mother was no better, calling daily with suggestions about how I should present myself. Darling, perhaps wear that navy dress we bought you for Christmas, she said 3 days before the event. And do something with your hair. Vanessa mentioned you've been looking a bit tired lately. The evening of the engagement party arrived with perfect weather, a beautiful June sunset casting golden light over the Boston Harbor Hotel's waterfront ballroom. Crystal chandeliers reflected against floor-to-ceiling windows, while elaborate floral arrangements centered each table. The guest list included Boston's elite, partners from Vanessa's law firm, researchers from Ethan's institute, and various society figures my parents had cultivated relationships with over the years. I arrived early as instructed, only to be immediately put to work adjusting place cards and directing the catering staff. My mother barely acknowledged me beyond a quick assessment of my appearance and a terse nod of approval. My father was busy charming potential clients, introducing himself as the father of the bride-to-be, the youngest partner at Wellington and Gray. When guests began arriving, I was forgotten, no longer useful as free labor, not important enough to be introduced. I watched Vanessa work the room in her designer gown, Ethan by her side looking handsome in his tuxedo but somehow distant, as if observing the proceedings rather than participating in them. The seating arrangement placed me at the furthest table from the wedding party, surrounded by distant relatives who asked probing questions about my divorce and expressed exaggerated sympathy about my situation. I was saved by Maya, my childhood friend who had maintained contact despite moving in Vanessa's social circles. "This seat taken?" she asked, dropping into the chair beside me. I swapped my place card. Couldn't handle another minute with Chelsea and her crypto investing husband. Maya's presence made the evening more bearable, especially when I spotted Daniel and Stephanie entering the ballroom. My ex-husband looked uncomfortable, while his very pregnant new wife beamed at everyone. Of course Vanessa had invited them. Nothing complimented her success, like a reminder of my failure. "Don't look now," Maya whispered, "but your sister's college roommate is coming this way. The one who became a lifestyle influencer." Chelsea Baldwin had been Vanessa's best friend since Yale and had made a career out of documenting her perfect life online. She approached our table with the practiced smile of someone who photographs herself daily. "Natalie, it's been ages," she gushed, air kissing near my cheeks. "We've all been so worried about you since, well, you know." She gestured vaguely in Daniel's direction. "But I hear you're doing some sort of childcare work now? How fulfilling that must be." Before I could respond, she continued, "Vanessa has been such a rock for everyone during your troubles. She's so strong. Ethan is lucky to have found someone so accomplished." Throughout the cocktail hour, I noticed Ethan's increasing discomfort. He smiled politely at Vanessa's friends but seemed to withdraw when conversations turned to status symbols or office politics. Once, when Vanessa was detailing their planned honeymoon to Bali, I caught him staring out the window at the harbor, his expression unreadable. Our eyes met across the room several times, each glance carrying the weight of our unspoken connection. During one such moment, Vanessa noticed, her smile faltering briefly before she tightened her grip on Ethan's arm and steered him toward another group of guests. As dinner concluded and the speeches began, the tension in the room was palpable, at least to me. My father spoke first, his voice breaking with emotion as he described Vanessa as everything a father could hope for in a daughter. My mother followed, detailing Vanessa's accomplishments from childhood through law school without a single mention of her personal qualities. Vanessa's friends delivered rehearsed anecdotes about her brilliance and determination. Chelsea's speech was particularly effusive, describing Vanessa and Ethan as the perfect power couple while making thinly veiled comparisons to those who settle for less than they deserve, her eyes flickering to me. Then it was Vanessa's turn. She stood gracefully, champagne flute in hand, her engagement ring catching the light. For a moment, she looked every bit the happy bride-to-be as she thanked guests for coming and expressed her joy at finding Ethan. But then her gaze landed on me, sitting at my distant table, smiling supportively despite everything. Something in her expression shifted. "I feel so fortunate," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "To have found success in both my career and my personal life. To have parents who taught me to aim high and never settle." She paused, her eyes still fixed on me. "And to have the wisdom to choose the right path in life. Because let's be honest, At least I'm not a divorced nanny who couldn't keep her marriage together. The room fell silent before nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. I felt blood rushing to my face as every eye turned toward me. Maya grabbed my hand under the table as I fought back tears, the public humiliation worse than anything Vanessa had done before. That's when Ethan stood up. Vanessa's words hung in the air like poison. At least I'm not a divorced nanny who couldn't keep her marriage together. The laughter that followed felt like physical blows, each chuckle another nail in the coffin of my dignity. I sat frozen, unable to move or speak, as Maya squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. My vision blurred with unshed tears. The crystal chandeliers fractured into kaleidoscope patterns above me. My chest constricted painfully, each breath shallow and insufficient. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to disappear, to simply cease existing rather than endure another second of this humiliation. Then movement at the head table caught everyone's attention. Ethan was standing, his chair pushed back abruptly. The room quieted as he straightened his tuxedo jacket, his expression unreadable. Vanessa looked up at him with confusion, her smile faltering. "I'd like to say something," he said, his voice calm but carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. Vanessa tugged at his sleeve. "Honey, you can make your speech after mine," she whispered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Ethan gently removed her hand. "This can't wait." He stepped away from the head table and walked deliberately toward me. The click of his dress shoes against the marble floor echoed in the silent room. He stopped beside my chair and extended his hand. Confused and still fighting tears, I placed my trembling fingers in his. He helped me to my feet with gentle firmness, then turned to face the stunned crowd. "The divorced nanny that Vanessa just mocked," he began, his voice steady, "is the reason I'm alive today." Gasps rippled through the room. Vanessa's face contorted with shock and anger. My parents exchanged alarmed glances. 2 years ago," Ethan continued, "I was sitting in Franklin Park when I had a severe allergic reaction. I couldn't breathe. I was dying." Natalie, who was watching her charges at the playground, recognized what was happening. She administered my EpiPen and called an ambulance. The doctors later confirmed that without her quick action, I would have died before paramedics arrived. The room was utterly silent now. I could feel every eye on us. Natalie visited me in the hospital afterward. Not because she wanted anything, but because she cared about a complete stranger. That's who she is. He turned slightly to look directly at Vanessa. We became friends. Coffee once a week. Conversations about books, ideas, life. Nothing romantic, nothing inappropriate. Just human connection. Vanessa stood, her face flushed with anger. "You knew her before you met me? You've been lying this whole time?" Ethan shook his head. "When I realized Natalie was your sister, we both agreed not to mention our prior acquaintance. It seemed simpler. I didn't want to complicate things."
He paused.
"That was a mistake. I should have been honest from the beginning." He turned back to the room. "Tonight, I've seen the true character of the woman I was planning to marry. Someone who would publicly humiliate her own sister for a moment of superiority." His voice remained calm, but carried undeniable conviction. "That's not someone I can build a life with." With deliberate movements, Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. He walked back to the head table and placed it in front of Vanessa. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but I can't do this." The platinum band with its massive diamond gleamed under the chandelier light as he turned and walked back to me. "Thank you," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "not just for saving my life that day, but for showing me what genuine kindness looks like." Then he walked toward the exit, leaving stunned silence in his wake. 3 heartbeats, nobody moved or spoke. Then Vanessa's voice shattered the quiet. "You slept with my fiancé," she screamed, pointing at me accusingly. "You manipulative bitch." The room erupted in chaos. Guests began whispering furiously, some standing to get a better view of the unfolding drama. Chelsea and Vanessa's other friends rushed to surround her, shooting venomous glares in my direction. I stood rooted to the spot, shock rendering me immobile. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not like this. The careful walls I'd built to protect myself from my family's judgment came crashing down as I became the center of the very worst kind of attention. How could you? My mother's voice cut through the noise as she hurried toward me. How could you ruin your sister's special night? That's when I realized everyone had automatically assumed the worst, that I had somehow seduced Ethan, that this dramatic scene was my fault. Years of being the family scapegoat had conditioned them to blame me without question. Maya stood beside me, her arm around my shoulders. You all should be ashamed, she said, her voice shaking with anger. Did you even listen to what he said? But nobody was listening. The narrative had already been written, and I was the villain. As Chelsea comforted a sobbing Vanessa, and my father attempted to salvage the situation with the guests, I felt something inside me break. Not just crack, but shatter completely. The worst had happened. I had been publicly humiliated, falsely accused, and villainized by my own family. And somehow, in the midst of this nightmare, I felt a strange sense of liberation. There was nothing left to lose. The ballroom had transformed into a battlefield. On one side stood Vanessa, surrounded by her protective circle of friends and our parents. On the other, I remained with only Maya beside me, facing the accusatory stares of people who had already decided I was guilty. You've always been jealous of me, Vanessa spat, mascara streaking down her cheeks. You couldn't stand that I found happiness after your marriage failed. My father stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Natalie, how could you ruin your sister's special night? Haven't you caused enough trouble in this family? Those words, so familiar in their dismissal of my feelings, so predictable in their automatic defense of Vanessa, ignited something inside me. Years of swallowed responses, of accepting blame to keep the peace, of making myself smaller to avoid conflict. All of it combusted at once. Me? I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I ruined nothing. I sat here quietly while Vanessa publicly humiliated me. I've spent my entire life being compared to her and found wanting. I've endured years of subtle and not so subtle reminders that I'm the family disappointment. The room had quieted, guests watching the family drama unfold with uncomfortable fascination. Did any of you even listen to what Ethan said? I continued, looking directly at my parents. He saved my life. We became friends. Nothing more. But that doesn't fit the narrative of perfect Vanessa and failing Natalie, does it? My mother stepped forward. Darling, you're clearly upset. I am upset. I interrupted, surprising everyone including myself. I'm upset that my own sister would mock my divorce and career in front of hundreds of people. I'm upset that my parents have never once defended me or acknowledged my worth. I'm upset that for 32 years, I've been treated like an afterthought in my own family.
Chelsea scoffed loudly.
Oh, please, this victim act is pathetic. Vanessa has always supported you, even when you made one terrible decision after another. I turned to her, suddenly unafraid. Really, Chelsea? Was she supporting me when she told everyone at her law firm Christmas party that my husband left because I couldn't satisfy him? Or when she accidentally invited Daniel and his pregnant girlfriend to family events just to watch me squirm? Vanessa's face paled slightly, confirming the truth of my words. You don't know anything about my sister, Chelsea began, but was interrupted by an unexpected voice. Actually, I believe every word Natalie is saying. A woman stepped forward from a nearby table, Rachel Cooper, Ethan's sister, whom I'd met briefly during cocktail hour. Ethan called me 2 months ago, concerned about his relationship with Vanessa, Rachel said clearly. He told me how she constantly put down her sister, how uncomfortable it made him. He mentioned that Natalie had saved his life, but they were keeping it quiet because Vanessa was so competitive she'd probably see their prior friendship as a betrayal. Vanessa's face contorted with rage. You're lying. Why would I lie? Rachel asked calmly. I just watched my brother walk away from his engagement because he couldn't marry someone capable of such cruelty. Natalie isn't responsible for any of this. You are. The room fell silent again. In that moment, I saw my parents' expressions shift, confusion replacing certainty, doubt creeping into their eyes. For perhaps the first time, they were questioning their automatic defense of Vanessa. Maya gently touched my arm. "Let's go," she whispered. "You've said what needed saying." With dignity I didn't know I possessed, I gathered my purse and walked toward the exit. Whispers followed me, but I no longer cared what anyone in that room thought of me. As Maya and I reached the door, I heard my father call my name, but I didn't turn back. In Maya's car, the adrenaline finally wore off, and I began to shake uncontrollably. "What just happened?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "You stood up for yourself," Maya replied, starting the engine. Finally. That night, after Maya dropped me home with promises to call in the morning, I sat on my small balcony, watching the city lights and trying to process the evening's events. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Natalie, it's Ethan. Rachel gave me your number. I'm so sorry about tonight. None of that should have happened to you. Can we talk tomorrow?" I hesitated before responding. Yes. The following afternoon, we spoke by phone. Ethan sounded exhausted but resolute. "I should have ended things with Vanessa months ago," he admitted. "The way she treated you always bothered me, but I told myself it was complicated family dynamics, not my place to interfere." "Why did you propose if you had doubts?" I asked. He sighed deeply. "Pressure. From Vanessa, from your parents, from my colleagues who thought we were perfect on paper. I kept thinking my concerns were just cold feet." He paused. "Then last night, hearing her mock you so cruelly, it was like seeing her clearly for the first time. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Are you okay?" I asked, genuinely concerned about him despite everything. "Honestly, yes." He sounded surprised by his own answer. "It feels like putting down a heavy weight I've been carrying. I'm staying with Rachel for now. I'm planning to take that research position in Chicago I was considering before Vanessa convinced me to stay in Boston." He cleared his throat. "Natalie, I want to be absolutely clear about something. I don't have romantic feelings for you. What happened last night wasn't about that. It was about finally facing the truth about my relationship with Vanessa. You just happened to be the catalyst." "I know," I assured him, relieved by his directness. "I never thought otherwise." "Good," he said, "because the last thing you need is more complications. But I do value our friendship, and I'm grateful for it." After we hung up, I felt a strange mix of emotions, residual anger and hurt, but also a surprising sense of peace. For the first time in my adult life, I had spoken my truth without apology. The consequences were still unfolding, but I couldn't regret standing up for myself at last. My phone rang constantly over the next few days, Vanessa, my parents, even distant relatives curious about the scandal. I declined most calls, needing time to process and recover. Maya visited daily, bringing food and moral support. "Your family is in damage control mode," she reported. "Vanessa's telling everyone Ethan had a nervous breakdown. Your mom's called me twice asking how to reach you." A week after the engagement party, Rachel Cooper contacted me. "Ethan wanted me to let you know he's moved to Chicago early," she said. "He thought a clean break was best for everyone. But he also wanted me to tell you that you're stronger than you know. He said you'll understand what that means." I did understand. Ethan had recognized in me the same strength I'd demonstrated when saving his life, a quiet competence that my family had never acknowledged. His words were a reminder that how others see us doesn't define our worth. 3 weeks after the engagement party, my parents appeared at my apartment unannounced. They looked older somehow, less certain than I'd ever seen them. "May we come in?" my father asked, his usual authoritative tone notably absent. Over coffee at my small kitchen table, they revealed that Ethan had spoken with them before leaving for Chicago. "He told us things," my mother said carefully, "about how Vanessa treated you, about things she said when you weren't around." "We didn't want to believe it," my father added, "but then we started remembering patterns. Incidents from your childhood. Ways we might have contributed to the problem." It wasn't a full apology, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd ever received. "We're not perfect parents," my mother said, reaching hesitantly for my hand. "But we do love you, Natalie. We've just never understood you the way we understood Vanessa. You never tried. I responded quietly. You decided who I was supposed to be, and when I couldn't be that person, you stopped seeing me at all. The conversation was difficult, painful at times, but necessary. We agreed to start family therapy, something my parents would have dismissed as nonsense just weeks earlier. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Vanessa and I didn't speak for 2 months. When we finally did, it was at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our homes. She looked different somehow, less polished, more human. I've been seeing a therapist, she said after we'd sat in awkward silence for several minutes. She says I have narcissistic tendencies and unhealthy competitive patterns. She stirred her latte continuously, avoiding my eyes. I'm not saying she's right about everything, but I've been thinking about things I've said to you, ways I've treated you. It wasn't exactly an apology, but from Vanessa, acknowledging any fault was unprecedented. I'm not ready to forgive everything, I told her honestly, but I'm willing to try building something healthier. Slowly. She nodded, looking relieved and disappointed simultaneously. I miss Ethan, she admitted. He was good for me. I agreed, but not in the way you wanted him to be. 6 months after the engagement party that changed everything, I stood in my new apartment, unpacking boxes filled with books and photographs. The space was modest but entirely mine, a fresh start in a building closer to the preschool where I'd recently been hired as lead teacher for the 4-year-old class. The weeks following the confrontation had been both challenging and transformative. I'd made the difficult decision to step back from family gatherings for a while, creating space to heal and rebuild my identity outside of the Pearson family dynamics. My therapist called it necessary boundaries. My mother called it dramatic isolation. Either way, it gave me the breathing room I needed. During this time, I rediscovered parts of myself that had been overshadowed by family expectations and my failed marriage. I enrolled in evening classes for a master's in early childhood education, finding unexpected joy in academic pursuits I'd once abandoned due to my father's dismissal of the field as glorified babysitting. The children I taught became an unexpected source of healing. 4-year-olds have an uncanny ability to see people clearly, without the filters of status or achievement that adults apply. To Emma, Lucas, Zoe, and the others, I wasn't Vanessa's disappointing sister or Daniel's ex-wife. I was simply Ms. Natalie, who helped them navigate their small but significant worlds. You're really good at this, my supervisor Jennifer commented after observing my classroom. You have a natural talent for connecting with children at their level while challenging them to grow. Her words sparked something I hadn't felt in years, pride in my own abilities, untainted by comparison to anyone else. My relationship with my family evolved slowly. The weekly therapy sessions with my parents were awkward at first, with my father checking his watch constantly and my mother deflecting difficult questions. But gradually something shifted. During our 6th session, my father spoke directly to me instead of through the therapist. I realize now, he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, that I've spent your entire life measuring you against a standard that wasn't fair or even relevant to who you are. He cleared his throat. Watching you rebuild your life these past months has made me see strengths in you I never acknowledged before. My mother reached for my hand. We've been talking a lot about how we contributed to the dynamics between you and Vanessa, how we allowed, even encouraged the competition and comparison. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Natalie. It wasn't an instant healing of 3 decades of hurt, but it was a beginning. Vanessa and I established a careful new relationship, more distant than before, but paradoxically more honest. Our monthly coffee meetings were initially stilted, full of safe topics and careful avoidance of trigger points. But gradually, we found ways to interact without falling into old patterns. My therapist says I tied my self-worth to being better than others, she admitted during one of our meetings. Especially you, because you were always content with things that seemed so ordinary to me. It made me angry because deep down, I envied your capacity for happiness. I wasn't ready to fully trust Vanessa, but I recognized the courage it took for her to acknowledge these truths. I spent most of my life thinking you had everything, I confessed. The perfect career, the perfect looks, our parents' approval. I never realized you were struggling too, just differently. Before his move to Chicago, Ethan had asked to meet one last time. We sat at the same coffee shop where we'd first talked after the allergic reaction incident, the symmetry not lost on either of us. I want you to know that you helped me find my courage, he said. Watching you weather your family's disapproval while staying true to yourself, it made me question why I was so afraid of disappointing others. I think we helped each other, I replied. You're standing up for me at the party. No one's ever done that before. He smiled slightly. Vanessa's been calling. Texts, emails, voice messages. Are you considering reconciliation? I asked, surprised by my lack of opinion either way. Ethan shook his head.
No.
What happened at the engagement party wasn't a temporary lapse. It was a revelation of character. I've moved on. He hesitated. She's been spreading rumors, though, telling mutual friends I had a breakdown, that there was someone else. Let her talk, I said with newfound certainty. The truth doesn't need defense. As months passed, I slowly reconnected with old friends who had distanced themselves during my divorce. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged. Those who had chosen sides couldn't seem to move past the narrative they'd constructed about my failed marriage. But others, like my college roommate Tara, reached out with genuine remorse. I should have been there for you, she said during our reunion lunch. I let gossip influence me instead of remembering who you really are. Most surprising was running into Daniel and Stephanie at a grocery store, their newborn daughter sleeping in a carrier. The sight of them no longer triggered pain or resentment, just a mild nostalgia for a chapter of life that had closed. Natalie, Daniel said, clearly uncomfortable. You look really good. Thanks, I replied, meaning it. Congratulations on your daughter. She's beautiful. Stephanie, whom I'd villainized in my mind for so long, suddenly seemed very young and uncertain. I've wanted to apologize, she said hesitantly. The way everything happened, it wasn't right. Looking at them, Daniel anxiously checking the baby, Stephanie with dark circles under her eyes, I felt an unexpected surge of compassion. They weren't villains in my story anymore, just people making their way through life's complications, same as me. Water under the bridge, I said, and was surprised to discover I meant it. On the 1-year anniversary of the engagement party, I received a small package from Chicago. Inside was a book of Mary Oliver poetry with a note from Ethan. Thought you might appreciate her perspective on living authentically. Thank you for being part of my journey toward the same. I smiled at his thoughtfulness, appreciating that our brief but significant connection had evolved into an occasional long-distance friendship, untainted by romantic complications or family drama. That evening, sitting on my balcony with a poetry book, I reflected on the strange path my life had taken. The public humiliation that had seemed like the worst possible nightmare had actually been the catalyst for profound change. By surviving what I feared most, family rejection, public shame, complete isolation, I had discovered strength I never knew I possessed. The truth was, losing a marriage that wasn't working, being mocked for a career I actually loved, and finally confronting the family dynamics that had diminished me for decades, these weren't failures at all. They were painful but necessary steps toward authentic living. I no longer measured my worth by my sister's accomplishments, my parents' approval, or society's narrow definition of success. Instead, I found meaning in genuine connections, work that mattered to me, and the courage to stand in my truth even when standing alone. Sometimes relationships and so better ones can begin, including the relationship with ourselves. Sometimes we need to be broken open to find what's been waiting inside all along. And sometimes, the moments that seem to define our worst failures actually mark the beginning of our most authentic success. I closed the poetry book and looked out at the city lights, feeling a deep sense of peace. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear, but for the first time in my life, I was walking it as my true self, imperfect, resilient, and finally, gloriously free. If my story resonates with you, Please share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't defined by family expectations or others' perceptions. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated you? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. Remember, sometimes the moments that seem to break us are actually setting us free. Thank you for listening to my journey.